Welcome to the Marc Steiner Show here on The Real News. I'm Marc Steiner. It's great to have you all with us. And welcome to another edition of Not in Our Name, our series of conversations with Jews from around the world saying no to the occupation of Palestinian land and homes and the ongoing oppression of Palestinians. There is another way. And today we hear from this man, Dave Zirin. Now, I've known Dave for some years now, and he's been a guest on my show on public radio before. I don't think ever before here on The Real News, but that's okay, because The Real News now has him here on the edge of sports, which is playing on The Real News. Dave Zirin writes a column in that name for The Nation magazine. He's acknowledged around the world as one of the best sports analysts, commentators, and writers, not just covering the games that we play and love, but diving into the social, cultural, and political worlds swirling around and through that world of sports. He's the author of numerous books, including his latest, Game Over, How Politics Has Turned the Sports World Upside Down, and, of course, the John Carlos story, the sports moment that changed the world, that won the NAACP Image Award. And let me leave time for our conversation. Dave, welcome. Good to have you with us, man.
Oh, I'm just thrilled to be here and honored. Thank you so much.
Oh, no, I'm looking forward to this. I didn't know until I thought about having you on this segment, Not in Our Name, that you have been around doing this for a while, talking at conferences, speaking out as a Jew, saying no. So talk about that sojourn. And for yourself.
No, absolutely. I was raised in a very Jewish family, like so many Jews in the United States. My grandparents and great-grandparents fled to this country from Eastern Europe to flee pogroms. Like so many Jews in this country, I lack a large family for the reason of the Holocaust. Like so many Jews, the stories of my grandparents and, from what I hear, great-grandparents of the shtetls in which they were raised no longer exist and are even difficult. We had to go through some effort to even find out the names of said shtetls. Like a lot of Jews, although not all Jews, my grandparents and great-grandparents were very wary about speaking Yiddish in front of me. I would catch them doing it, but they were very insistent on English because they were very won to this idea that America could be a place where they would be safe. And if there's one thing I'm happy about when I think of my grandparents is that they didn't live to see Charlottesville, that they didn't live to see the Tree of Life massacre in Pittsburgh. I'm actually grateful for that, not just because they led long lives and they would be 115 if they had lived that long, but also because they did have the illusion, and I do think it is an illusion, that this country would be safe for the Jewish people, but they had a bigger illusion than that, which was that if the country would not be safe for Jewish people, if that day would come, then they had Israel, like almost like a place to go, where they could be safe in a world built around, in their mind, understandably, a history of attempted extermination by dominant cultures, that Israel would be able to protect them from that. I grew up with that idea very strongly. I went to Hebrew school where what was taught often was Zionism and supporting Israel more than the Bible and the services and the historical culture. I had a teacher, I'll never forget, an instructor who joked, we're over 5,000 years old as a people, but in this room, we're going to stick to the last 30.
Wow.
And,
Whoa.
and like almost like Judaism is born in 1948 or 1967. Like that's where you get Judaism in full. Like because until we have our own homeland, how can you really call us a people? I mean, that is something I've heard people like arch Zionists say, that it's almost the negation of Judaism to not have a homeland. Now, I grew up and like yourself, Mark, I found myself, very in sync with a more radical set of politics than was on offer from the Democrats and the Republican Party. Started seeing change as being a product much more of social movements and individuals rather than in the result of people, cutting deals in back rooms on Capitol Hill. And that's what I dedicated myself to. But I held on to those Zionist ideas. So I would say things like, I'm against all war, but Israel has the right to defend itself. I'm against all nationalisms, although except for, I think Israel is really an exception to that. I'm against all nationalisms except nationalisms of oppressed people, like Black nationalism. I will always proudly stand with Latinx nationalism. but Chicano nationalism. But at the same time, I would. This is such a long answer. Is that okay?
That's cool, man. Listen, go ahead.
All right. But at the same time, I would be like, Israel is the exception. Israel is the exception. And obviously, I was always, because I was in these radical circles, I was in debates with Palestinians, with other Jews, with people I respected deeply, people from the Middle East.
This is in your 20s?
Yeah. Yo, right now, when I'm talking to you, I'm between the ages of 18 and 20.
Okay, right.
Like,
okay,
and
right.
if my mom is hearing this, she's going to wish I was in class more. But I was, in college, I was doing most of my reading outside the classroom, if I'm being really honest.
I understand that completely, yes.
Yeah,
I got you.
and I was reading, believe me. Just wasn't what I was being told to read. And finally, the contradiction just became too great. Like, I want to see liberation for all people. And that means liberation for the Palestinian people. I want to see liberation to for Jewish people, of course, but I don't think, certainly not now, I could say I don't think a right-wing theocracy is an avenue towards liberation. But even in those days, when people were, hopeful about Rabin and Arafat and Oslo, when there was this sense of hope of a two-state solution, even then, I was like, I need to reject this and really stand for one state with equal rights for all, because a two-state solution would be an unequal relationship and further oppression by different means. We need to have a South Africa mindset to this, where we have to identify apartheid as apartheid, and as consistent anti-racists and anti-oppression activists, we need to take this on. Now, I had Jewish people in my home be like, racism, what are you talking about? This isn't black and white. But it's like, that only made me more firm in my beliefs, because if you can understand historically how the English oppressed the Irish, and if you understand historically that race is just an idiotic construct that's constructed as a modes of oppression, then I think racism has to be identified as such a dominant feature of Israeli society, and one that's long-standing, and let alone talking about today, where they're now actually talking actual legislation for different punishments based on your ethnicity and based on your religion. Yes,
right. With this new right-wing government.
Yes, exactly.
Fascist government.
Yes, but this fascist government, to me, all it is the fruit from a poison tree. It's something that has been coming to fruition for some time. And the last thing I'll say is, when people say to me, well, what did you read to shape your politics about this? It's like, of course I read some of the most famous stuff that's been out there about this by some of the great anti-Zionist writers, Jewish and otherwise. And I've read some things I've disagreed with by people like Norman Finkelstein, for example. But part of me also really respects the way he stuck his neck out there for all these years, but although there are parts of me that disagree with him a lot, but that's another question. Yeah. But the real thing that I read that really started to shift me, honestly, was the op-ed page of Haaretz, which to a lot of folks in Israel is effectively the New York Times of Israel, for folks who don't know.
Exactly.
And reading in the op-ed page that they used words that we're not allowed to say in the United States, like apartheid. That to me,
referring to Israel as an apartheid.
Referring to Israel as apartheid place, and talking about it, Jewish writers speaking about that openly, and what the responsibility is of Jews in that context. That to me was just like, okay, there's justice and injustice in this case. This is straight up a which side are you on question. We can't straddle the middle on this, and that made me a fighter for Palestinian liberation, which I've proudly been in the decades since.
And it made me think, a lot of things popped in my head as you were speaking, and I was thinking about this poster that I got in Cuba in 1968 when I went there for the first time, and the poster was a picture, a drawing of the entire state of Israel, Palestine as one, and it said, "One state, two peoples, three faiths." It's a poster I still have hanging in my study.
That's beautiful.
And it struck me because I was at that point a really newly minted against Zionism, Israeli state. After, as I told you before, in the air, that thinking about volunteering for the Israeli army to fight in the '67 war.
When you said that, Can I jump in real
Yeah,
quick?
sure, go ahead, man.
Because this speaks to when you came of age. I once had someone tell me this amazing story and this just says something about why a lot of Jewish people feel a great deal of confusion on some of these questions. I think that their synagogue in 1964 gave their youth group had the option to go on the freedom rides or go to Israel and work in a kibbutz or something of that nature.
Yeah.
And it's just so interesting to me that they saw no contradiction in that whatsoever.
Oh, none.
None.
I mean, you talk about the freedom rides, and we don't want to rest too deeply into this, but 70% of the white freedom riders were Jews.
Yes. Wow. Yeah, and which speaks to a lot of the right wing, and we don't talk about this nearly enough, but like a lot of anti-Semitism from the right about the 60s movements, SDS.
So let me ask you this difficult question. You just raised it. And you've spoken about this. I've seen it at some of the conferences you've been to and things you've written. And the quote you had at the beginning of our discussion today, the right-wing Christian nationalist movement in this country, which is hugely powerful and is seizing power across this country right now, really dangerous for our future. They are, at the same time, they are anti-Semitic, they are pro-Israel.
Mm-hmm.
And so it creates this real confusion. I mean, and let me add to that something even more difficult to me in some levels. You have these conversations you've had with a number of people, like with Michael Bennett, and we'll talk about that, and Kyrie Irving, and it also goes into this difficult area of Jewish racism and black anti-Semitism. They both exist, and it complicates this struggle. Both those things. Talk a bit about your thoughts around that, and how we navigate ourselves through that.
Absolutely. The starting point is asking the question of navigation of a very difficult question. And that navigation begins with history. So the history between black people and Jewish people in the United States is extremely complicated, extremely multi-layered, and has been written about in great detail by authors, both Jewish and black, have pondered this. Of course, James Baldwin, Richard Wright.
Right.
I mean, there's a real pondering of what do we make of Jews? Like, are they our comrades in struggle or not? And one of the things, and of course, much has been written by Jews of all stripes about, like, how do we work with black people? How do we fight racism? Why do we feel like it's an obligation to fight racism? Why, like what you mentioned about the percentage of Jews involved in the freedom rides. I mean, that comes from a faith that says we need to stand with black people, but that's only one side of that tradition.
Right.
And that tradition is important, though, because the other side, and I'm going to surprise you with what I say the other side is, I think, the other side, which doesn't get talked about nearly enough, is that black people have put their lives on the line fighting fascism since the 1930s.
Easily.
1920s even, with the invasion of Ethiopia by Mussolini.
Right.
And that's never talked about. It's always like, I feel sometimes that particularly Jewish liberals are like, why don't you support us, to the black community? We have fought, for you for so long, not with you, but for you,
which is a whole different concept.
And it's like you owe me something.
Right.
And I feel like, wait a minute, do you realize that black people died in Spain fighting the Spanish Civil War to keep Franco from taking power? I mean, black people, they put themselves on the line against international fascism time and again. Not to mention, you think of people like Paul Robeson taking a stand against McCarthyism, which was a wholeheartedly anti-Semitic institution, among just about everything institution.
Right.
So I think that part of the history needs to be known. The other part of the history, which I know you're familiar with, Mark, but just saying it for the listeners out there, is you have to deal with the economic basis of the cities of the United States to understand the tension. You have to understand whiteness, and what I refer to sometimes as conditional whiteness. Jewish people, in the cities, striving, attempting to make it in this country, strong emphasis on community and education, strong emphasis on rising, and a strong emphasis on patriotism as well. Eventually leaving the inner city setting up camp in wealthier, more affluent neighborhoods, or even just neighborhoods that are not so people living on top of each other, housing projects and the like. But they're still owning a lot of the local businesses and running a lot of the local businesses. And then Black people, the Great Migration, coming up from the South, living in cities. So if you are Black and living in a city 100 years ago, and you feel generally screwed over by society, who is the face of society that you see every day? It's not somebody running a Wall Street bank. It's not somebody in the Oval Office. It's the person you see every day at the local store, every day at the cleaners, every day, what have you. And on the other side of the law, who is running the numbers in places like Harlem? Who's got the power? There's the local guy, but then there's the man, and the Jewish mafia was very real at that time.
I knew them well. Yes, you're right.
So you have all these complications to the relationships that have led to a lot of tension and a lot of belief that Jewish people are part of the problem in the quest for Black liberation, which came out, I think, in a lot of Kyrie Irving's comments in terms of the video that he was trying to put forward.
Right.
But with that comes a great deal of lies and anti-Semitism that is very at home among the Christian nationalists, white in this country. And when Kyrie Irving started to say what he was saying and telling people to see this movie, Hebrews to Negroes, I believe it was called.
Right.
When he was pushing that virulently anti-Semitic video, look at who was celebrating it. I mean, there were NBA players defending his right to have put out anything he wanted on social media, because that was an interesting debate too. Like a lot of them saying, well, wait a minute, the league wants us to be socially active, but as soon as somebody tries to flex that in a way the league thinks is bad for its business, it cracks down on them. Like a lot of players were like, what is this? But if you look at where Kyrie Irving was celebrated, he was being celebrated in the same corners that Kanye West was being celebrated. Nazi message boards, fascist message boards, that whole idea, like, oh, they're pointing out, that the Jews are like these blood-sucking people who are out to destroy, and they, all this stuff, and so they actually attach themselves, strange bedfellows, to someone like Kyrie Irving, who they would, probably see as completely less than human in the first place.
Absolutely right.
So that's a lot. That's a very long answer, but I think that provides some of the context for understanding that there's this incredible sense of connectivity between Black people and Jewish people, and an incredible sense of division. And I think it is because of Jews being granted not whiteness, but this conditional whiteness. Like, we will allow you to achieve and access the benefits of whiteness. However, if we feel like you are stepping out of just being quiet, good burgers, you will be a target.
Right.
As we've discussed, whether it's McCarthyism, whether it's SDS, whether it's this new generation that we're seeing in Jewish currents, whether it's the young Jews who are in the streets around Black Lives Matter, all of a sudden, if you notice, it's Jews will not replace us by the far right.
Right.
And so that's that, and Tree of Life. That's the conditional part.
So I want to get into the stuff you've written about young Jews. I think it's really a critical part of our discussion today. But as you were speaking, I was thinking, that everything we wrestle with politically and socially and culturally in our world is a mass of all the dialectical contradictions inside of it that just twists its way around life and existence. And Jews, as in the 16th, 15th century through the 19th century, because of the Christian domination, were supposed to be the moneylenders. They were forced to be moneylenders and do certain jobs that Christians would not do.
Right.
And so that morphed into the oppression that many Jews took part in this country when it came to owning corner stores and more, and being landlords and slumlords that I organized rent strikes against in the early 70s. And it was, and to hear the anti-Semitic comments of the people we were organizing against Jews while we were organizing them, to rent strike against these landlords. So all that's there, and now you have these contradictions of the right-wing Christian nationalists who hate Jews but want to hold on to Israel and want as a tool of oppression and domination.
Yep.
And all that is intertwined. And then you have, at the same time, you have the heart and soul of the socialist and communist and labor movements of the 20s and 30s, in part was Jewish.
Mm-hmm.
And that same stream, that same dialectical contradiction exists at this moment in the form we face today.
Yeah, and just to speak to my own history, it's like my grandfather was on one side was very right wing. His cousin fought in Spain, and who he was very close to. So that's interesting to have that on the same tree. And my other grandfather, who I was very close to, he would tell me stories with tears in his eyes about like the job that his family could get so they could live in this housing project was to collect the rents. And his father got really sick. So at age 14, his job was to go door to door and collect the rents from Black people.
Oh, my God.
And he would often be confronted more with tears than anything else.
Right.
And it wrecked him. It wrecked him. And he said, more often than not, I just said, don't pay. And then my dad would get mad at me. And he would he was sick, but he would have to sort of trudge and get it. And eventually they moved to Florida as prescribed to all Jews. And
the other Israel.
Yeah. and so but it speaks to that. I mean, it's like, so someone says, what's the Jewish political tradition? It's a lot of things. But it also, like, to me, the tradition that I identify with is one that fights all oppressions, is one that links arms with all peoples, and also is one that owns its own cultural history and listens when people say, okay, these are some of the problems that we've had historically in building Black and Jewish relationships. I mean, this stuff runs really deep.
Very deep.
And you can't ignore the scars, no matter which community created them, no matter what. You can't just pretend they're not there. They need to be discussed.
So let me kind of move to the stuff you've written about and that many people are talking about now, which is what's happening, and the latest polls have shown that you wrote, that you attached to your link to in your article for The Nation, that young Jews are shifting
dramatically, I think,
when it comes to Israel-Palestine. And young Jews are moving left in many ways, and some inside the Democratic Party, some moving outside the Democratic Party. So I want let's talk about what you see there, and what contradictions, and what movements, and what that sets up for the future.
Yeah, I mean, I think what it sets up is and maybe as soon as 2024, unless people are too concerned about Trump and rising fascism to raise it.
Which is something to be concerned about.
I am in no way saying denigrate anybody's fear about that, but it makes me think it'll sort of tamp down like convention criticisms. But I'll tell you this: if they did a vote on the grassroots of the Democratic Party about a disavowal of funding Israel, I think it would pass. I mean, we're talking grassroots Democratic Party. I'm not even talking people who vote Democrat. I'm talking like the people who show up to the convention even.
Right.
I mean, a few rounds ago, I'm trying to remember, I think it was Obama's 2012 run, they actually had to stop the calling of a vote that looked like it was going to narrowly pass.
I remember.
Yeah, do you remember? Yeah. Yes. I mean, so to me, you're like, what does this lead? You ask, what does this lead to? And it's a great question. I think it has to lead to a massive political confrontation with the Democratic Party. Like things like President Biden inviting Netanyahu to speak and smiling. That's just going to be unacceptable. And for a lot of people, it's unacceptable now, or it's a reason to break from the Democratic Party. Because the Democratic Party, it's so complicated because the upper reaches of the Republican Party are pro-Israel, yes, for historical geopolitical reasons and imperial reasons, in terms of what it allows it to do in terms of...
And Christian ideology as well.
There you go. Right. Millenarianism.
Right.
Like a huge part of their base. It's like the world's going to end anyway. And that, justifies a lot of things, from not caring about global warming I mean, all sorts of issues come from that millenarian mindset. And one of them is defend Israel at all costs, even though the people who live there are all going to hell unless they convert.
Right.
And it says something about the bankruptcy of the right wing in Israel, that they somehow accept this and say, wow, we love having these amazing partners in the Christo-fascist community that thinks we're all going to hell. You know, what the heck? But it just says something, because it says how the allies have dwindled for Israel. And that's where it's really changed on our side of the equation. I know you interviewed Peter Beinart for this series. I'm going to paraphrase what he said, because I don't remember the exact quote. But he said, when it comes to young Jews, whether they're going to check their Zionism or political liberalism at the door when they enter a room, they're gonna check the Zionism, which is a big difference from decades past. And so when I'm talking to young Jews, I'm seeing people, and I do talk to them a decent amount, like a lot of being influenced by the Black Lives Matter movement, a lot being influenced by being anti-oppression in general, a lot of being influenced by LGBTQ struggles, and seeing all of this as being connected to Palestinian liberation, which is really interesting, because it also raises questions of what we call pinkwashing, because Israel likes to raise itself up as the LGBTQ place in the region. And yet I know Jews who have successfully gotten like Israeli flags banned from pride marches, because they say that that's actually using our struggle as a reason, as a motivator for oppression in the region. And we stand with the Palestinian people. And so these questions are, that's the other thing about the change. It's like, you actually have to think, to me, to arrive at a position of opposition to Zionism, or even opposition to the Likkudite section of it, like
the right wing.
The right wing, yes. There is a thinking process that has to happen to get to that point, to oppose pinkwashing and not just say, well, they like gay people in Israel, it can't be that bad. Like there's a thinking that has to go on. Like, we suffer from a crisis of imagination sometimes, to the point of which we can't even imagine the idea of a state with equal rights for all that could exist in harmony with one another. And I do understand the pessimism. I don't want to dismiss that out of hand. But at the same time, for those of us who believe in these ideals of human liberation, this is a moment in 2023 where we can't afford to have a crisis of imagination. I think we're going to be saved by imagination, because we have to be able to see the world as it isn't, not merely as it is.
No, exactly. So let's conclude with this. I'm curious to see how you think that might play out. I mean, I was thinking back to the roots almost of when Israel began as a state, even before that, before it began as a state. People like Achad Ha'am, who was the founder of the modern Hebrew language, the poet and writer, Martin Buber, the great Jewish philosopher, Albert Einstein, together, the three of them and others, came together and said, no, Israel should not be a Jewish state. It should be a binational state, which is what their line was in 47, 48, 49. And now we come to this place we are now, where the contradictions are just everywhere, because it's this right-wing neo-fascist government in Israel that is clearly oppressing Palestinians and other Jews who don't agree with what they say. And you have the anti-Semitism is rife in this world, just like racism has been rife in this world for a long time, and it's there, and it plays into all of that. So all these massive contradictions are in the midst of that. So I'm curious how you think this plays out, how you would analyze where the movements go from here in terms of fighting for Palestinian rights, not falling into the world of anti-Semitism, and building a new kind of world.
You're going to have...
Just a lightweight question.
But it's the question. Well, I have no crystal ball.
Yes, right.
Let's make that clear.
Right.
Right away. At the same time, I think you're going to see a line, and on one side of the line is going to be the bulk of Israeli Jews. And on the other side is going to be Jews internationally, not just the United States.
Right.
I think that's the confrontation that's coming up. And those Jews who are opposing Zionism are also going to be the Jews who are going to be on the front lines opposing fascism. So how interesting is that the Christo-fascists are going to be lining up on one side of that line with not just the Netanyahus of the world, but I'll repeat, the bulk of the population. It's the settler colonialist mentality.
Exactly.
And then on the flip side, you're going to have people who just say no and lead with their Jewish faith by doing it with that slogan, "Not in our name." That's where it's going. And I think we're going to end up in a situation where there's going to be a lot of power in the hands of people in the United States who want to reject Israel as this kind of permanent ally that we give billions of dollars to, but they're going to be quashed by other interests that want. So I just think this debate is going to roil at the grassroots, both inside and outside the Democratic Party. And I only raise the I usually don't even care about the inner workings of the Democratic Party. That's, I mean, because not because I think it's irrelevant to broader politics, but I figure, so many people care about that. We have to have people who care about what's happening outside and tend to it, as it were. But a break at that level would be seismic in terms of the ripple effects through organizations, through AIPAC, through J Street, all the lobbying organizations. And for people who don't know, AIPAC is a hard right-wing lobbying group in D.C. J Street is much more of a left center. But for J Street, I think J Street is racked with contradictions in terms of its mission. What would it do to J Street with all of its connections in the Democratic Party if the Democratic Party said, yeah, no more blank check for Israel? That would be voted on now and win in the Democratic Party because of the gap between the grassroots,
right,
and the people kissing Netanyahu's butt. So where is it going, or where could it go, are two different questions. I mean, where it's going is, I'll quote Public Enemy, Chuck D. The future holds nothing else but confrontation. That's where it's going. Where could it go? Peace, and peace means a state with equal rights for all to worship as they choose. And anybody who says that could never happen, that's a fantasy, I respond and say the fantasy is that you can have this quasi-fascist Israeli state right in the middle of the Middle East and say that represents liberation for our people.
Right.
That, to me, is far more of a fantasy than the idea of people being able to live together in peace.
Dave Zirin, this has really been a pleasure. I'm glad we had a chance to do this together. There's so much more to talk about with this, but we'll do that in the future.
I'm thrilled, Mark. Thanks so much for having me.
I really appreciate you being here. And I think that one of the things about our series here, Not in Our Name, is to have a positive outlook that we can make the change, we can make it happen, we can unite with the right people to make a different kind of world.
And the three letters we didn't mention, of course, is BDS. Which I shouldn't split hairs about. I actually believe in that as a time-honored tactic that has a place in politics. And the idea that it's illegal in Kansas to be for BDS, laws like that, to me only speak to the ludicrous nature of the United States. And I just we'll leave it at that.
Well, Kansas also is the home of the Wizard of Oz.
But this idea that you could be sanctioned for importing coffee from the West Bank or something is just absurd.
Ridiculous.
Absurd. So BDS, boycott, divestment, sanctions, absolutely critical. Israel calls it an existential threat because it speaks to the question about whether they could exist. I say the question of existence is about the existence of an apartheid state, not about a state itself.
Dave Zirin, thanks so much.
Thank you.
And continue to listen to Dave here on The Real News, Edge of Sports, and read him in The Nation, Edge of Sports, and all of his fantastic books that come out. And we're really happy that Dave is part of our family here at The Real News right now. Dave, thanks so much.
Oh, I'm thrilled.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation today with Dave Zirin. Please continue listening or tune in to his work, Edge of Sports, right here on The Real News. And thank you all for joining us today. And thanks to David Hebden and Kayla Rivera behind the scenes, and everyone here at The Real News for making this show possible. Please let me know what you thought about what you heard today, what you'd like us to cover. Just write to me at mss@therealnews.com, and I'll get right back to you. And while you're here, please go to www.therealnews.com/support. Become a monthly donor during the summer drive. become part of the future with us. So for the crew here at The Real News, I'm Marc Steiner. Stay involved, keep listening, and take care.
Thank you so much for watching The Real News Network, where we lift up the voices, stories, and struggles that you care about most. And we need your help to keep doing this work, so please tap your screen now, subscribe, and donate to The Real News Network. Solidarity forever.